enjoy the program, and we have materials here for you to consider.
To set the tone for the program, I thought I'd ask Jude and Aaron to go ahead and start with a number, and they can introduce the number themselves.
Okay, we're going to start with a old Creole tune that was one of the ones recorded by Amede. I forget the name. Amede recorded it under, I think, two-step Prairie Swallow is what he recorded it as, but today most people know it as faire. And we're going to just play a little bit of it to give you a little bit of a taste of what that song sounded like.
At the beginning about the way this book came about, and every once in a while in the life of a writer, you sort of can remember, what the specific inspiration or what the particular time that the idea of the book came to you. And for me, the specific moment that I knew that I was going to write this book came to me on 2nd Street in Eunice. I think it's on 2nd Street where the coffee house is, where the usual readings are. And I had finished writing this book, my last full-length manuscript, Megan's Guitar and Other Poems from Acadie, and I wasn't really sure that I could write another book or that there was going to be another book. And then in the reading at the coffee shop that night, it occurred to me that Amédé was going to be the subject of the next book. And I think the way that that happened was that the maestro of the Acadiana Symphony Orchestra wanted to write a piece of music and leave a piece of music here that had something to do with the Cajun and Creole culture. That informs so much of the music and the culture here. And so he called Zachary Richaud and asked Zachary to begin a project that would end up being a kind of musical production, but that would focus on the Acadian and Creole culture. And Zachary brought me into the project, and we started talking about which people or what story we wanted to tell about Southwest Louisiana, and we decided on Joseph Beausoleil Broussard, who was the leader of the first large migration of Acadians into the Louisiana Territory in the middle of the 18th century. But as we talked, and if any of you know Barry Ancelet has no problem with telling you what you should be doing in a particular project. And I say that as, with all respect to Barry, because he has good ideas, and his ideas are worth thinking about. He said, y'all can't write this book without writing about the strong women who came in on that particular migration. And he said, those women were not like Evangeline, who was sort of deferential and sweet and delicate and so forth. They were strong, strong and strong-willed women. And so Elizabeth Brasseur entered into the story, and many other historical figures who were women. And I think that's the thing that began to make me pay attention to people whose histories had not been written. And that's how Amédé came to me. To me, this is a man who is worth paying attention to, a man whose history is worth paying attention to. And initially, I fell in love with Amédé's story because he's an iconic pioneer musician. Dennis McGee of Eunice lived on the same farm, on the Mercantile farm that Amédé Ardoin lived on. And Dennis McGee calls Amédé Ardoin une chanson vivante, a living song. And one of the things that I learned, and one of the things that I think is so impressive, is that Jude mentioned when he introduced his song about Amédé sort of showcasing and formulating something that was of his own out of an old Creole song. At the time that Amédé was recording, there were no standards for recording, and there were no, Amédé didn't conceive of a song as having a fixed form. When he got up and sang, he often sang about people in the audience. He often changed things. When he recorded in his 12 songs for the Decca Recording Company in 1934 in New York City, the most recurrent phrase in his songs is, "I want to go home." And so whether he was talking about Crowley, or whether he was talking about the Madame Chen, or whether he was talking about whatever it was that he sang about, he would say, "I want to go home." And so in some ways, he's our first performance artist in a sense, because it wasn't until a few years later that standards would get set when the songs were commercially recorded. And when Amédé recorded the songs, they became set because of what he was doing in getting the songs recording. But they were much more fluid before that time. Amédé interested me, as I said, first of all, as a musician. And then the more I learned about him, the more he interested me as a human being. Here was a man, 2 generations from slavery, who had this crazy-ass idea in his head that he wanted to be a performer and that he didn't want to work on a farm. And so and that he would do whatever was necessary to make that happen. He would go work in the oil fields. He has a song about working in the oil fields. But he says, "I'm working in the oil fields to be able to go to the dance, to be able to play at the dance." But this idea of, and this is what I think means something to me as a teacher, and means something to me as a student of this particular music. It's that when you get the idea of what it is that you want to be, let that idea clarify itself, and let that idea be the thing that propels you to your life's work. And that's the situation that we all find ourselves in. I can assure you that there's no money to be made from being a poet. And I can assure you that I would be nothing else. I retired 10 years ago, and I hope I have another 10, 15, 20 years, to keep writing poetry. And it's what I want to do because it is an essential, honorable human activity. And that's what Amédé means to me. That as a kid, as a young man, he decided that he would be in charge of his life, even if it cost him his life, and it did. And so, for those of you who don't know the story of Amédé, it's a huge story, and I tried to condense it into 15 poems in this book. All of the poems are inverted sonnets, and all of the poems at the beginning of the book are written in English, and they're all persona poems. They're all poems written in someone else's voice. And I was really lucky because I met people that I think are culturally important in the writing of this book. And the first person that I met was Dennis McGee. And if you want to get a wonderful picture of Dennis McGee. Get the library or somebody at school here to order this film for you. It's just been transferred to DVD. It's called Alan Lomax's American Patchwork Cajun Country. And Dennis McGee is interviewed at length. So is Canray Fontenot, who is another important icon. So is Michael Doucet and Barry Ancelet. But the important interviews, I think, are the ones by Dennis McGee and by Canray Fontenot. And other people talking about their music. Do any of you in here know Mr. Wade Fruget from Eunice? He has some interesting footage in the film as well. But Dennis McGee was a white fiddle player who played with Amédé, and he was Amédé's favored partner in music, in performance. And he, as I mentioned before, and Amédé both lived on the Marcantel farm. And this tells the story, this first poem tells the story of Dennis McGee going from his house to Amédé's house to ask him to play on what became a fateful night. Amédé was beaten in a racial incident after a dance, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. But this is Dennis McGee, his favorite fiddle player, going to ask him to the dance. Dennis McGee goes to see Amédé. I went to see if he would play with us that night, his head and face a silhouette against the white of Cayette's broad flank. He barely looked my way, but I could see a smile, a yes, or a way precisely in his own tongue. He seldom passed up a chance to put himself where he could sing while others danced. I loved that little man in ways I did not understand, and others, for the most part, allowed that brotherhood most of the time. What I didn't know was that this night would end all we had together. He'd lose everything that made him who he was. He'd walk around in a shell of himself for a while, and in the end, he would go quietly in a place he didn't even know. I haven't been able to find the precise year of the assault, but at this dance, it was the middle of summer. It was hot. It was humid. Y'all know all about that. And Amédé was playing furiously, and he asked someone, would someone get me a rag to wipe my face? And Celestine Marcantel's daughter, on whose farm he lived, opened her purse and offered him her handkerchief. And that infuriated two men in the crowd who beat him and thought they had left him for dead. The next poem is Celestine Marcantel's poem, The Man Who Gave Dennis and Amédé a Place to Live. The man who was the father of the woman who offered him the handkerchief. We lived in the strangest times in those days. I knew Amédé and Dennis and all the others who knew what they were made to do here. They had to farm, had to work in the oil fields, had to fish for their meals, had to hunt the little animals in the long grasses and those jumping in trees in the woods near their houses. They tended melitone growing up in the back of the yard, picked blackberries in the ditches, planted gardens, and put every kind of seed they could get their hands on into the ground. You always found something you didn't expect to find where they lived. But they knew better than anything those songs alive inside them. And I needed those songs too. And so there's this kind of, mysterious, generous man who makes a place for Amédé in this community. And people, this isn't a community that's a fiction or that's a metaphor. It's right there, near Basile, where the end of St. Landry meets Evangeline Parish. The town of Durham is where the Ardoins come from, and you know, those little rural communities. So here's a figure who's emerging as a great artist and an influential artist. You have a historian who lives right down the road on Highway 190, Anne Savoy, you know, who calls Amédé Ardoin the backbone or the rock of all Cajun and Creole music, and I'll hopefully explain that a little bit too. In my research, one of the things that I couldn't find were the names of the men who supposedly beat him and left him with a brainstem injury, which would end his career as a performer. But I wanted them to have a poem, and I wanted them to speak in their mean, narrow-minded voices. And so there are two stories, or more than two stories, about how Amédé met the end that he met, which was in Pineville, not knowing who he was. And one of them is that it wasn't these two men who did him in, but a jealous black fiddle player. And often when we have trouble with racism in our society, we shift the blame around. And this is one of those instances where it wasn't two hateful white men, it was a black man who was jealous because Amédé liked Dennis better than any other fiddle player. And so here's the poem that makes reference to the jealous musician, but it's called The Unnamed Assailants. There are two French terms in here that I don't think I need to explain, but I will anyhow. One of them is tineg. And everybody, all of us who have been brought up in Creole and Cajun cultures know that particular term, and we know that it's both a term of endearment used in certain contexts, and it's a hateful term in other contexts. It also happens to be what Amédé called his little black monarch accordion. He called it tineg. And so that's one term. The other term is la putain de Marcantel's bitch. Our names are not recorded in the story. We may be the thugs who beat him or the jealous musician who poisoned him. It doesn't matter. We were there then, and we are here still. It was all tineg this and tineg that, a clack clack so hard to bear. But when la putain de Marcantel did what she did, we knew the next step. We followed him on that dark road home, beat him senseless, or poisoned him perhaps. It doesn't matter. We rolled over his head and neck and left him there. Put the quietus to him. Broke the songs, we thought. If only we could have got to him before the music. I'm not going to read all the poems for you. Someday I want you to go and buy that book and get the whole Marcantel story, the whole Ardoin story as I conceive it. One of the people who became interesting to me in this particular research was Aurelia Clint Ardoin. Supposedly near Bayou Napiquet, Thomas and Aurelia Clint, his parents, had a 125 to 150 acre farm, which was such a remarkable accomplishment at that time, because his father had, as a child, been born in the time of slavery. What happened to the family after Thomas' death, we don't know, but we know Aurelia died in poverty. Aurelia's husband, Thomas, was not only a farmer, but he would also do other jobs. And he was hauling a wagon load of meat on a wooden bridge near Bayou Napiquet. And the bridge collapsed. The wagon, the meat fell on him, and he died. Amédé was 9 months old at the time, so Amédé was orphaned as a child. This is Aurelia Clint Ardoin's little boy. There are references to two Creole Cajun songs in the book, Tigalo, which many of you know, and Tabole Montreno. Tabole Montreno. Could y'all give us a few strains of that?
I can't do
Okay.
that one justice.
All right, okay, good. This is Aurelia Clint's Ardoin's little boy. He was the seventh of my 7 sons. From the start, he wasn't like the others. He was a squirmy baby and he cried a lot. His voice was always way up there. Before he could walk, his daddy died in that bridge, falling in on his wagon filled with meat, and on him too. I remember him in Austin and Baudouin, playing in the yard next to the lemon tree, singing Tigalo and Tabule Montrano. Like he cried, he'd sing way up there, and then he'd bring the song down, piece by piece, until you could see yourself in it. I could hear him singing when I died. The next poem in the book is Jolene's version, and Amédé always sang to this Jolie or Jolene. Amédé was never married, and he was supposedly in love with this woman that my research tells me was Maisie Broussard, and my research also tells me that she decided to marry someone else because Amédé was too dark, which again opens up something that we need to know and that we should know about our culture. One of the people that Amédé sort of is resurrected inside of is Aurelia Lejeune. Aurelia Lejeune, who grew up just a few miles from here in what's known as Pointe Noire, near Church Point. Aurelia Lejeune was legally blind. He grew up in Pointe Noire, poor, from poor parents, as was Amédé. From the time he was 7 until the time he was 12, he was at the Baton Rouge School for the Blind because he was legally blind. When he came back as a teenager, pre-teenager, he couldn't work in the fields. And he spent a lot of his time sitting on the porch. He happened to have a set of 78 RPM records of Amédé's. He sat on the porch and he listened to the records and he learned everything that he knew about music from Amédé Ardoin by listening to those songs. And I think there's a possibility that we can get an Aurelia Lejeune song. And I'll let y'all introduce it.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to do a song that originally it was one of Amede Ardoin's called Tantaline. And Aurelia Lejeune took that song and turned it into Viens me chercher, which is, the melody is pretty much the same melody. The lyrics to Aurelia Lejeune's song are your typical lyrics about a man singing to a woman who has left him and wishing that she would come back. And we're not going to sing because I can't and he won't. This is Viens me chercher. I could sit for hours on the porch, rocking in my chair, listening to his old records. Here was the man who gave me Jolie Catin and the Convict's Waltz. Without him,
how could I have gotten close to the songs I wanted to make? Church Point Breakdown and Viens me chercher. Everywhere I lived, I carried the sounds of his monarch inside me, from Pointe Noire to La Cassine, inside La Valse de Pont-Amour. Field work was not for me either. Like him, I couldn't see anything but the songs. I walked like he walked. I carried my accordion in a sack to play. I caught lines. Songs living in me said everything I knew. What we have to remember when we try to get at the genius of Amede, which again, to me, is the genius of Van Gogh, of Vincent van Gogh, another man who wasn't supposed to be an artist and never was accepted during his own time. Van Gogh sold 2 paintings during his whole lifetime. And you couldn't work 3 lifetimes in order to buy one of his paintings. And to me, he's our Camille Claudel, another famous artist who worked in isolation and worked without recognition. What we have to remember when we listen to the Meches playing their song, that Amede and them could hear no music other than what was in their community, other than what was in their family. They didn't have access, to any other kind of music. So that makes the dedication to his art even more remarkable to me. Amede recorded about 34 songs. He recorded a recording session in New Orleans, one in San Antonio, and one in New York City. And the next poem has to do with that recording in New York City. When he left to go, when he was planning for the trip to record for the Decca Recording Company in 1934, December of 1934 in New York City, Dennis McGee was supposed to go with him. But if you have any Cajun or Creole uncles, you know that sometimes Cajun plans are sort of fluid. And just before he left to go, he went to Amede and he said, "Oh, well, I can't go. You'll have to get somebody else." So there was a 17-year-old kid that he knew and who had been playing a little bit with him by the name of Ken Ray Fontenot. And so he asked Ken Ray to go with him to play the fiddle. And Ken Ray was really excited about it, as he tells us in his interviews. And he said, "And I went to ask my mama, and my mama said no." You're not going, you're too young, you're 17 years old. And so Amede ended up going to New York City with Cléoma Bro Falcon and her husband Joe Falcon, who happened to be the first people who commercially recorded Cajun music. They recorded Alonzo Lafayette in New Orleans, and that's the first commercial recording that the research tells me was made of Cajun music. So Cléoma Bro Falcon, and Cléoma Bro Falcon is another remarkable woman. Her father abandoned the family when she was 12 years old. She had 3 sort of rowdy teenage brothers. At 12 years old, she was asked to take care of the house and take care of her brothers. Her mother had to go out and do domestic work because of the abandonment. At 15, she met Oliver Hanks, who was a guitar player. And you know how attractive guitar players can be to teenage girls. She married him. By the time she was 21, she was ready to divorce him and was ready to go and commercially record. She became one of the first performing musicians, professional performing musicians, a cool lady. She knew fashion magazines. She'd go buy dresses at Mervyn Khan in rain and go home and deconstruct them and make them look the way she wanted them to look. She knew Mother Maybelle Carter and what Maybelle Carter was doing with June Carter and her sisters in Appalachia, and she said, "Why not in rain?" And so I'm currently working on a series of poems on her. And on Ari Lejeune, and it'll be the full-length manuscript. Ari, Amede, and Clément will be the 3 subjects of the full-length manuscript. So anyhow, This says something about her character too. She and Joe said, well, Amédé, come with us. We're going to record. They get on a bus in South Louisiana. They're separated because of the social conventions of the time. They can't talk to him. He can't speak English. He can't speak English. He can't read and write in any language. And so he's going to New York City. He's not a novice. He's already had a recording gig in San Antonio and New Orleans. So he knows some of the business. But here he is going into New York City. They travel all the way up to Hoboken, New Jersey. When they get on the ferry at Hoboken, in the middle of the Hudson River, the ferry begins to sink. It's December 1934. It's the Depression for everybody, everybody else. It's one of the reasons that these recording companies were paying attention to people like Amédé and Cléon. Everybody was scrambling to try to find new ways to make money. The ferry begins to sink, the water rises to their knees before another ferry rescues them. And this is the poem Cléoma Falcon with Amédé in New York City, 1934. Amédé didn't know it, but we were lost too. It was Christmas time in a city bigger than anything we thought we'd ever see. The wind tunnels between the buildings blew us all around, as well as the bus tokens and Hoboken's ferry sinking and water rising. I tried to keep his hat in sight, a guide of sorts to keep him with us when we could not sit together sometimes or comfort each other in our common tongue. Lonely and homesick, his eyes said everything. They opened wider every time we got turned around, glazed over when we completely lost our bearings. He became the man we knew only in the songs. And to introduce the next poem, can we have one? This is probably one of the most famous and my favorite Creole song by Canray Fontenot called Bonsoir Mode. This is an image of Amédé Ardoin. It's an image done by a Canadian artist that we used for the cover of our book, and it's taken from the only known photograph of Amédé. This was taken from his confirmation picture. And as you can see, when you look at this particular picture of Amédé with his cool-looking little hat, Pharrell Williams thinks he's all that and stylish and stuff. Here was pre-Pharrell. Anyhow, here's Canray Fontenot's poem. Canray talks to Michael Tisserand. I knew him ever since I was a little kid. He wanted me to go with him up north with my fiddle to record his songs at Decca. I was 17. My mama wouldn't let me go. Like Boisec, I played triangle behind him. As a boy, I was watching how he was playing and listening to his tune and learning the words. At the end, the only news we got was from the family who went to see him over there in Pineville. They said the people said he wouldn't drink and he wouldn't eat. It was like he couldn't do anything for himself. The last we heard of him, he was stone crazy, his brother told us. It's how we let him go. And for many people, those of us who had family who went to what's called now the Central Louisiana Hospital, as kids we called it the insane asylum. And for people who went there, it wasn't unusual that after a few visits they quit going. It was hard to travel from Eunice to Pineville during those days. And so Ken Ray's family and Ken Ray's father, Ardoin Fontenot, who is a very important musician, but who would not record and would not play publicly very much because of religious beliefs. If he had recorded, we would have another great musician with us in our records. But it was not unusual. And the Ardoin family, in the last couple of decades, have begun an effort to be able to bring Amédé back home. What happened when they went to Pineville was that they found out that there were over 1,000 people buried in the Negro cemetery in unmarked graves, so that it was impossible to find the physical remains of Amédé. You can imagine the times and the customs and so forth. Here were people whose families were not going to see them anymore. And so when they died, they just dug a hole and put them in and didn't mark it. And that was Ken Ray's, that was Amédé's fate eventually. Those of you who are in here, how many of you know the music of Chris Ardoin?
My nephew plays it.
What's that?
My nephew plays the guitar for him.
That's good. A wonderful musician, and he's one of Amédé's relatives. How many of you know the music of Dexter Ardoin, Bourque Ardoin, Ken Ray Fontenot, Corey LeDoux? They are all part of that family and an important Louisiana musical family. The Amédé Ardoin Project is a project that a group of us in the community joined the Ardoin family to try to do what we could to symbolically bring him home. If his remains can't be found, we want to acknowledge him as one of the cultural icons in our community. And so we've joined the family to do that. And we're raising money. All of the profits from this book go to the Amédé Ardoin Fund. Among the other things that we're looking for corporate support. So if you know somebody who has a business who might want to support this project, put them in touch with us. And we're also doing something that was an important part of the Cajun Creole tradition, that was holding veillées, going to sit up at night and visit at night. Before we had iPads and television sets and all of that other stuff, we would go visit relatives and have a veillée. And so what we're doing is promoting the idea of having veillées where we can tell the Amédé story, and any veillée that raises at least $300, we have a little yard sign that says Amédé stopped here on his way home. And so that's sort of what we're trying to do. We're in touch with this incredible artist from Basile, who got his BA degree at Southern and then went on to get his MA and MFA at Berkeley in California, and taught his whole life at Western Michigan University, a man named Al Laverne, who is an internationally known sculptor. And he's one of the people that we're talking to try to create the public commemorative. The last point, I'm going to read one more poem, and then I'm going to ask the Meches to close us out with one more song of their choice. In the poems, all of the poems up to this last poem are persona poems, and they're in the voices of someone who knew Amédé and knew the Amédé story. The last poem is called If You Abandon Me, and If You Abandon Me, comment je vais faire is not an original title with me. Those are lines taken from Amédé's songs. And so in the last poem, I followed the 14 unrhymed inverted sonnets with a true sonnet, which is made up of 3 quatrains and a couplet, and it's a found poem, and every one of the lines are from Amédé's songs, all 14 lines, and they're all in French. And if you'll be gracious and kind. I'll try to read them in French. I'm terrible at reading in French, but here are the lines that make up this last sonnet. And I wanted the last sonnet to be in French because it was Amédé's language, and I wanted it to be in Amédé's words. There's not an original word of mine in the poem. If you abandon me, je suis orphelin il y a beaucoup des années. Comment je vais faire, tu m'abandonnes? Oh, mon cœur fait si mal de jongler. T'as passé me donner ta main, t'as parti en pleurant. Quand j'ai arrêté, moi, j'ai demandé pour toi. Oh, Katem, mais oui, tu es tout seul. Il n'y a pas personne qui veut venir avec moi. Moi, je suis parti pour fuir, pour aller au bar. Comment je peux faire quand je jongle à toi? J'ai pas de maison pour aller. Tu me demandes toujours plus que je te dois. J'ai demandé à you tuer. Moi, je m'en vais tout seul à la maison. Je suis parti à la prison. And it is in that prison of abandonment and loneliness. And we can't say despair because we don't know what he felt in those last days. He was at Pineville for 6 months before he died. And as a kind of tribute to him, we'll listen to some music to close out the program, and then I'll answer any questions you might have.
This is Amédé's High Point two-step.
Still lives, in the hearts and the minds of people who didn't know him. And we have not only Jude and his son, but Professor Hugh Hall here, who plays the accordion and plays Amédé's music and is affected by Amédé's music. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have or any comments.